everybody, welcome to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thanks for joining me on another episode this week. And we are going to talk a little bit more, and it's been the dominating topic the past few weeks. It's probably going to be that way for a little bit here. And there's two players that I want to focus on that have been successful this year that many people might not have thought that they would be successful. And I'm talking about Malik Willis and Sam Darnold. Willis, of course, is the former Titans quarterback that was traded late this offseason to Green Bay, who has come in and won two starts for the Packers in the wake of Jordan Love's injury. And Sam Darnold, the former Jets high draft pick, has been the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings and has led them to a 3-0 record after their first round pick, JJ McCarthy, was injured this past preseason. So both of these guys are super interesting to me because they were drafted and thought of as the next in line to lead their teams to playoff contention, potentially Super Bowl contention. That was especially the case with Darnold. He was a top 10 pick. That was a QB class that was heralded, and he was right there at the top of that class. And they were forced into action with the teams that drafted them and were on very short leashes. And they ended up getting kicked to the curb, right? And they end up in the situations that they're in now and they're flourishing. So, kind of want to talk about why that happens and why it's going to continue to happen and why Willis and Darnold have been able to find a little bit of success right now where many others have not. So, let's talk a little bit about how they're forced into action. Darnold was, of course, drafted by the Jets, top 10 pick, forced into action right away. It was a disaster. That team was just not good. And they let him go for a couple of years before they let him walk. He eventually had a stop in Carolina. He had a stop in San Francisco last season as a backup. And he was brought into Minnesota this year as a veteran leader backup for JJ McCarthy. McCarthy gets injured, he's thrown into action. Not too unlike what happened with Geno Smith after Russell Wilson left Seattle, where he was in there backing up Russell, and he was really just kind of this veteran that could be a spot starter, gets an opportunity, and all of a sudden you have, your new quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, right? Malik Willis was drafted by the Titans outside of the first round, and it was in a year that had a particularly weak quarterback class. The only real other QBs from that class was Kenny Pickett. I believe Sam Howell was also drafted later in that draft. So not super heavy on talent like in Darnold's year. But he is in Tennessee. That was kind of towards the end of Mike Vrabel's tenure, where they started to lose games, and they still viewed themselves as a playoff team. He was behind Tannehill. He only got three starts before they pulled the plug on him. The leash was super short, didn't perform well in those three starts, and then the following season also didn't really get any action. And then this year they had transitioned into the Will Levis era, and he is eventually traded to Green Bay for a seventh round pick, so basically for nothing. And then so both these guys they head into this year and they think they're just going to be backups, right? Jordan Love just got paid a big contract, $50 million, and he's the franchise guy, so Malik is just really just trying to rehabilitate his value and eventually get back into the league. Darnold, on the other hand, is backing up JJ McCarthy, so he's going to be that veteran presence to help the rookie kind of navigate what it's like to be in the NFL. And there's going to be backups, they're going to collect their money, and that was that. And then, like everything, injuries happen. They're forced into the action. And I remember specifically really with both of them that the tone was negative, right? After Willis was tapped as the starter after the week one injury to Jordan Love, everybody's like, well, the Packers are done. Malik Willis can't play. We saw what he was in Tennessee. And then in Minnesota, everybody's like, well, Darnold isn't really that good. You might be lucky to win 7, 8 games. I know I had that opinion about Minnesota that they would probably have a drop off after, the past couple years of kind of being in the hunt and that they would just rebuild anew with JJ once he's back off of his surgery for next season. Well, it hasn't really happened that way. Willis, while in a limited capacity, a lot of handing the ball off to Josh Jacobs, a lot of on the move design plays, a lot of scripted plays, a lot of him running, and not as much reliant on him as a passer, but he's been successful. The offense has been executing, they've been scoring points, and they've won 2 games. Darnold, he's just been throwing the ball all over the place, and Minnesota looks like one of the best teams in the league right now. If you were to make any sort of bets on league MVP and it ended today, Sam Darnold probably is getting a lot of votes. So they were kind of forced into this action again, but now they've had time to mature. They've had time to see what the NFL game is really about. Whereas when they were younger and with their teams that drafted them, they were just shoved into it right away. And I think the important thing to highlight here is that when you're drafted as a QB, unless it's like in the later round, a lot of times you're going to a bad team. There's exceptions to this rule. Lamar Jackson comes to mind, right? But generally, they're drafting a QB for a reason, right? If it's in the later rounds, probably drafting you to be a backup to the preeminent starter that they already have. But then in the earlier rounds, they're drafting you to be the future face of the franchise to turn things around. That was especially the case for Darnold. The Jets have been starving, clamoring, desperate for the next QB. And throughout my entire life, and I'm in my late 30s now, the Jets have always had flirtations with different types of quarterbacks. When they drafted Mark Sanchez, they thought he was the guy. Didn't really work out. They drafted Geno Smith, who was mentioned earlier. It didn't work out. They brought in Brett Favre. They have brought in a variety of different veterans. It just hasn't worked out. Joe Flacco was there for a little bit, and it just hasn't. Now they have Aaron Rodgers. It seems like the franchise is perpetually cursed at that position. Really, ever since Chad Pennington was there and they had a little bit of success with him. Same thing with Sanchez. But it's a team that's constantly searching for the guy, and they haven't been able to find the guy. Darnold was supposed to be that, but it really didn't work out. The team around him wasn't very good, and the defense hadn't matured to what it is now, and the offensive line wasn't great, and he took a beating in New York. He ends up going to Carolina, getting a little bit of opportunity, but fizzles out there as well. Goes out to San Francisco, learns under Kyle Shanahan, and then, he kind of learned how to be a pro, right? And he has applied that into his working with the Vikings. Willis was on an even shorter leash. 3 starts is what he got in Tennessee. That's it. That's all he was given. 3 starts in his rookie year, and then they said, "Screw this. This guy's no good. We're going to go to Will Levis." And it feels like the one that just how do you evaluate a QB after 3 games is beyond me. And it feels just like those are 2 bad situations, right? You had Tennessee, a team that used to be in the playoff hunt, all of a sudden is losing games. Their coach is on the hot seat. He's trying to make things happen. He throws in the young guy. Young guy's not doing anything. So, well, gotta get rid of the young guy, bring the old guy back. Oh, no, this is working. Let's get a rookie. Bring the rookie in. Rookie's not doing that well. And now look at the Titans. Will Levis might be one of the worst QBs in the league. It's just a bad situation, right? And the Jets was the same thing. It was just a revolving door at QB. So it speaks to how quickly these teams have now been expecting these QBs to come in and dominate, right? Like right now, this year, you have a lot of rookies who have started right away. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix. They've all come in, been drafted high, and been expected to play right away. And it's been bad. Like Caleb threw the ball 52 times yesterday, and there's bad picks, they're taking bad sacks. You're seeing it with a guy like Anthony Richardson, who clearly looks like he wasn't ready, even though he's now in his second year. And teams aren't really giving a lot of these guys the time to develop. The interesting thing is, if you look at the best QB out there, which is Patrick Mahomes, he was given a year to sit behind an incumbent starter and allow the NFL game to come to him and to learn it better. But again, not everybody's as well run as the Chiefs. Not every young quarterback has an Alex Smith to look up to. I think Drake May in New England is going to benefit tremendously from the fact that he has Jacoby Brissett to show him how to be a pro. And in the garbage time he got against the Jets on Thursday night, he really showed that he wasn't ready to be the guy yet. Bo Nix is going through this as well, right? He has all these guys that are just they're being thrown into the fire. And for a while, it was like you would give a rookie QB a few years to figure it out, right? But now that timeline has shrunk. You saw Bryce Young get benched after 2 games after his rookie season, 2 games of his second year, and he's already benched. And the problem for him now is Andy Dalton looked really good. Very hard to believe that we're going to see Bryce Young as a Panther anytime soon on the field. And as you look around, you're seeing the window of time that they're given shrink and shrink and shrink. Colin Cowherd has kind of given this timeline when it comes to young QBs that they're given their first year to make mistakes, and then up to Thanksgiving to Christmas of the following year, or else they're moving on. And I think the reason for that, and I think it's true, the reason for that is so much so many of these owners come from the business world. The business world operates on okay, what are my wins and losses for this quarter? How do I improve them for next quarter? You operate in a quarterly fashion, right? And it doesn't always work that way in football. Again, you look at these guys who have gotten better over the years, like Kirk Cousins has gotten better over the years. And if he was just given up on after one season, then who knows what his career would have been. There's just a lack of patience when it comes to a lot of these owners. And they are going to want results immediately, especially if you're a top 10, top 15 pick drafted at the quarterback position. Bringing it back to Anthony Richardson, he had a really bad game against Chicago yesterday in what was probably one of the most unwatchable games of the weekend. And I think he's in trouble of being benched. And it's just his second year. He didn't even play his full first year. But when you're making mistakes and you're supposed to be the franchise guy, and it seems like you fail at the most basic throws, like Richardson has, y- you start to have hear these whispers about the quarterback being replaced. And I think a part of this, a part of the reason why we give up so fast, is because quarterback's super important, right? It's we've talked about in previous episodes. It's the highest value position in sports, I would argue. And when it is the highest value position in sports, you generally aren't given time. It's not like you're a slot receiver or a running back even or an offensive lineman who are given, a couple more runway than a year and a half. These QBs are expected to come in, be great immediately, and keep it going. It just doesn't happen that way for everybody. Not everybody's Joe Burrow, who could just come in, or Ben Roethlisberger would just come in and all of a sudden their lights out, right? But I think what we're learning from both Willis and Darnold right now is that a lot of these guys now they do have resilience, right? They are able to say, all right, this didn't work out where I was. How do I pick up the pieces and keep going, right? And the interesting thing about it is because of how quickly all these teams are giving up on young QBs, you're having this situation where you don't necessarily need to have a guy that was drafted by you to be a solid contending team. Like you look at the Saints when they picked up Derek Carr. He was discarded by the Raiders. They just had enough. You look at Stafford and Goff, that situation in Detroit and LA. They were done with Goff. They felt like it hadn't worked out, so send him over to Detroit, and now he's winning games in Ford Field for the Lions. And it just seems like when we're giving up on these players so quickly, it's like the weird byproduct of the free agency and player movement and all this stuff is that teams are getting maybe a little too aggressive at times and not letting the cake bake. And you can argue that that's the case for both of these guys. But another thing to really consider is that they got blessed by having these two coaches that are really, really sharp and in tune with things. It's why I think Brock Purdy has been so successful in San Francisco. He gets to learn under Kyle Shanahan, who's one of the smartest offensive minds that we have in the last 20 years in the NFL. Willis goes to Green Bay, where Matt LaFleur takes him and says, all right, so here's what we have. You got a little bit of decent arm talent, but you could really move. So how do we make that work? We run the ball a lot, get you on the move play action, easy to read throws, and he's had success. He's not throwing it 40 times a game, but he doesn't need to because Matt LaFleur has worked within his skill set. It's not a situation where he's shoving him into it. You see Andy Reid with Mahomes. The way he schemed for Alex Smith wasn't going to be the same way he schemed for Mahomes because Mahomes has more of the physical element where you can move the pocket, you can have, designed rollouts, and you allow him to improvise a little bit more. It's the same concept, right? Where obviously Malik Willis is not Patrick Mahomes, but you see what he is good at and you lean into that. The same thing's happened with Darnold in Minnesota because Kevin O'Connell, again, a very sharp offensive mind, has seen what he can do. He got a little bit of mobility, really good arm talent, decent accuracy. You have guys like Justin Jefferson who are elite receivers in the league, so you're really doubling down on that. They really took a step back in the running game this past year as they've lost like Dalvin Cook and stuff, but they bring in Aaron Jones, who's been a big help for them. And Darnold has flourished with this play caller. And it, if anything, is kind of taken away from this, it's the idea that we know now that offensive minded coaches, young, innovative offensive minded coaches, are going to continue to be at a premium. So when Ben Johnson in Detroit or Slowick in Houston decided they're ready for the next step and to be a head coach, they're going to be in super high demand because you are going to want to have an innovative play caller or innovative offensive mind that could really mold to the skills of a QB. Because now you have such a wide-ranging skill set of quarterbacks. Back in like the 80s and 90s, the prototype was the same because it was forced to be the same. Anytime there was like a scrambling quarterback that came out, you always had threw him at wide receiver, did the Cordell Stewart slash position or whatever. Now QBs are allowed to be a little bit more different, right? You can have somebody like a Kirk Cousins who's more of that pocket passer, operate within the pocket, roll out with the coverage kind of thing. You can have a Patrick Mahomes who's an improviser. You can have a Lamar Jackson who's really great as a runner. And it's on the offensive mind to be able to tailor their playbook to the skills of that. So you look at Ben Johnson in Detroit. He has Jared Goff. If he all of a sudden had to have a scrambling quarterback in there, he would have to adapt his system, as opposed to what they did in the past, which was force that scrambling quarterback to be a pocket passer. Or on the flip side, if you coach Lamar Jackson and his backup can't run like Lamar Jackson, you can't call the same plays as you did for Lamar Jackson. It's totally different. You have to be adaptable. And that's kind of what we're seeing the trend shift to. And I think there is a little bit of a troubling factor that we have these players who get given up on so quickly, because it's such a high stakes industry, that you want to have success, you want to be great, you want to do things that help you get to a Super Bowl. And because quarterback is such a high importance, and I think about a guy like Trevor Lawrence right now, who is, I'm recording this before the Jags play the Bills on Monday night, but has been losing a lot of games, and a lot of people are questioning him, and people were saying he's a generational talent coming out of Clemson, and it looked like it was trending that way. He's had some growing pains. You wonder, like, if he gets moved on from, like, it just feels like you're restarting the cycle over and over and over again. And I just wonder, like, long term, what that does to certain players. Willis and Darnold, it seems like it's made them stronger. But think about somebody like Josh Rosen, who was a first round pick, drafted the same year as Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Josh Rosen's out of the league. And part of that, I think, is because his style of play has kind of went away. But the Cardinals draft him, they give him 1 year, then they move on from him and draft Kyler Murray. Now, of course, they made the right decision. Kyler Murray's a great talent, but they give up on the guy, and he hasn't really had a chance to really flourish anywhere else in the league. And I think it's a bit unfortunate that the leash is that short. Like even the NBA, like they'll allow a rookie a few years, to develop before they say, "All right, we're done with you." But at the quarterback position in the NFL, it's cutthroat. If you don't show some sort of meaningful improvement within your first year, they'll just move on from you and say, we'll just draft the next guy. Because a lot of times they can easily get off of these rookie contracts. It's not a huge financial impact. And they could just try and get the next guy because ultimately, if there are five QBs taken in the first round in a given year, only one or two of them are going to be really good, and then you just got to hope that you get the right guy. And if you don't get the right guy, then you feel like you're stuck on the treadmill, right? It's kind of the purgatory thing that you have in the NBA. I mean, think about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've been on this track for a little while, ever since Roethlisberger retired. They haven't been able to find the right guy. Now they're hoping that Justin Fields is that, and he has led them to a 3-0 record. And while again not looking super awesome, but he's another reclamation project. The Bears decided to move on from him after a few years, 2 years, and drafted Caleb Williams. And and yeah, and then he's now with the Steelers, and a lot of Bears fans are like, we should have just stuck with Justin Field. He's winning games, and Caleb is. And there's this allure with college football, right? Because you see these guys throwing the ball all over the yard, and like, man, that's some arm talent I could use. So you're probably seeing this. People are watching Ole Miss right now. They're seeing Jackson Dart throw these bombs, right? And they're probably thinking, my QB right now can't do that. I should try to go and get this guy. But then they don't understand that there is a step up in competition, a step up in difficulty that comes from being in the college game, even if you're in the SEC, into the NFL game. And it leads to this high turnover, which is just, I think, not great. And I think it's led to this disintegration of high level talent at the quarterback position because it's not really nurtured. So if you don't have it right away, like a Mahomes or a Burrow, then they kind of move on from you quickly, and then you're not really given the chance to develop because then you just picked up some on someone's practice squad. You're just kind of doing scout team reps and that sort of thing, and you're not given a chance to develop and advance your game. And it's that kind of high stakes game that makes me actually super excited and happy for what Malik Willis and Sam Darnold have done because they defied the roulette odds of the NFL quarterback system as it stands in 2024. They took their bad experiences, were able to shape it into development, and have now found some success. Now, when Jordan Love comes back, yeah, that's Malik Willis is not going to be the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and Sam Darnold might only have this year in Minnesota, and maybe some other team tries to take a chance on him, or maybe he goes back to being a backup. We don't know, right? But in this moment, they are experiencing success. They are showing that they still have it, and the things that we saw at USC with Darnold and at Liberty with Willis are real, and the potential was always there. Maybe we just didn't give it enough time to fully blossom. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up here for another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining me. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider liking, subscribing, and following on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. New episodes drop every Thursday. Make sure to check out the link tree in the description to follow me on social media and my written pieces on Medium. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran, Deep Cover Podcast. We'll see you next week.